Facta non verba. Um, Deeds, not words. Indeed. So, was it a deed or merely a word that brought into existence the nebula hypothesis of Immanuel Kant around 1755? By which I mean, for the first time since remote antiquity, or classical antiquity, Anaximenes, these uh, um, Tales, and some others had put forward theories of material origin of the Earth. But it is nothing really like the modern nebula hypotheses or the cosmological view of things, because there's no sort of notion of infinite space and of outer space, as it were, being involved. It was just it was something different. I'm not really sure what they were thinking. And so this is what I'm trying to get to here is all our current legal discussions rest on a massive frame change in how nature was discussed. And then part of it involves sort of seeing what was not seen, this vision of the earth coming into existence physically, in the sense of that we all take it for granted in some way. So that it's very hard for us to ask the question without already seeing it that way. It doesn't even, it's as though it were an a priori. It's as though it didn't require experience. It's simply, that's what nature means for us. But okay, let's look at this phrase, the famous phrase, state of nature, and compare John Wycliffe, who was, remember, England used to be Catholic. He was a Catholic. In circa the year 1400, who spoke of the state of nature. But what did he mean by it? He meant basically a synonym for the pre-lapsarian world, or for the world prior to the fall, the big biblical fall. The point is, it wasn't a belief. It was that was just their best thought on how Adam was the first man. If you don't, so we were just talking about a cosmological view of things, as it were, how the planet came into existence, but even sort of closer to us than that is evolution of the species. If you don't have the notion of evolution, change of form, of the ape becoming a man, it's not even at all clear how you would even pose this question of how human beings, the first human being, came into existence, when all you know is what you see, is human beings breeding and coming and bringing themselves into existence as they now do. It stands sort of outside any. It's not even conceivable for us to ask the question the way it must have been asked prior to the notion of change of forms or evolution. Somebody could have struck on it in some way, in this speculative way. And it's not true that Anaximander thought that, as some people claim, because what Anaximander meant was that the human beings notoriously take a much longer time to be able to survive without the parents than do most animals. So that it would become a question to him, like, if the first human being began as a baby, how could it not succumb to the exposure by the elements, or being eaten or something by predators? Um, and so he came up with this notion that it came out of the mouth of the fish. And Anaximenes has a different theory, but that's a different. Um, that's not. It doesn't have anything to do with evolution. It just has to do with material. So actually, we're dealing with a new frame, but then it's sort of like, what's this, a deed? What is it, fact, as it were? That this new theory, this new way of seeing became reality, just that what we accept as it were a priori without experience. Um, it could be regarded different ways. It could be regarded as undisclosure, says aletheia, or as it were, becoming ceasing to be ignorant on a matter. Become aware of the depths of space, um, and we became aware of this type of processes became overwhelmingly evident somehow, and they couldn't be ignored anymore. There was more and more sorga, as it were, or being turned towards all these type of subjects, like the depth of the stars. Are there more stars that we can't see? How far does the universe go? Or there's so many planets, mustn't there be life on other planets? And so many things were turned towards this direction. Inevitably, the view of what the state of nature was changed. It was, again, what was the original, did Wycliffe mean by the state of nature? What he meant, again, was the pre-Lapsarian age, Eden. He meant Adam. This is where we went off on this long little vague of its own. This is where we're back there again. He meant the time before the Genesis, what happened in Genesis. And he meant that he took it straightforwardly, and he called that state of nature. So in that state, there's no private property. I'm talking about Eden. In that state, the man has a total dominion over everything, all the plants and animals. In that state, there's no positive law. There's no, because remember, we're talking about law. So it's like, what's the difference between natural law and positive law? And in this first instance, we could see that there's a divine positive law in the form of not just the Decalogue, but in the form of the whole Mosaic Code, which says particular things like, in the case of an inheritance, the eldest gets a double portion, and the rest get one portion. Specific, spelled out laws. Positively spelled out, but divine positive law, going against what people knew without the law. Then all kinds of questions open up, and so on. It's like how much of the law is imprinted, and how much has to be positive, divine positive, and then those questions have been asked for a very long time. And then okay, so hundreds of years pass. I guess it's Pope Clement the Seventh makes this strange. He's sort of like the proximate cause, if you like, if not the essential or, as it were, legal cause of the Anglican Church coming into form, because he denied the annulment of Henry VIII's marriage, and then Henry VIII, because he's a good Catholic, he had to execute his wife because he couldn't remarry while she was still alive. And then, finally, so we got the Reformation and so on. And so then we have, the Reformation comes to England. So we have then a situation by Locke's time where there's arguments between the former Catholic forces and the new Anglican forces. And then in Locke's time, you get sort of this debate on the ground of basically this question whether we're going to still regard the biblical version of nature as correct, and this means basically the fall, the biblical, the Adam, Eve, and the expulsion from Eden. This basically means the biblical view taken literally. Are we going to surrender the biblical view taken literally, which then is contrasted with the grace, the fallen grace, and instead it introduced this new notion of the state of nature as against government, as against perfect government, more perfect government, most perfect government, superlative government. On the one side, state of nature. On the other side, most perfect government. That replaces, on the one side, taken very straightforwardly again, this is our only, we have this total mystery to us how human beings came into existence. This is what we've posited, this is what we think. There was this Adam. And we take it literally. And so then we talk about the fall, which is a specific interpretation of it. Part of that interpretation would involve, for instance, something like a question like, do we see in the Cain's discussion with Hashem something like the first awareness of specifically human sorga, specifically docile sorga, in the following sense. The Septuagint give a dark version of it, a cynical version, remembering that the Septuagint were trained in the spirit sort of Socrates. There's sometimes you see the so-called cloven hoof of Plato in some Platonic dialogues, and basically on echo with the way they interpret the Cain and Abel story, which is now the version currently in currency. Strauss shows that in the Meno comes and interviews Socrates for mercenary reasons, because if there is such a thing of arte or virtue, which is supposed to be at the core of manliness. So it means something like in Latin, it has translated, I forget this, I used to know how Cicero translated fortitudio. So, virtue sounds sort of soft in a way to our modern ear because it's come through the Victorian period. But it meant fortitude. Fortitude would be a better word. So to get closer to the meaning, Cicero says by arte, which is translated as virtue, what the Greeks meant. Cicero studied in Athens. What the Greeks meant was what we call fortitudio, or fortitude, the chief virtue of a man who was expected to go to war. So we get this a picture of law that goes with a specific interpretation of nature, specific notion of nature, which is partially the mixture of this sort of Roman attitude, Greek attitude, and partially of the Hebrew attitude. But okay, so let me go back. So what's the modern interpretation of the Cain and Abel story, which comes down to us through the Septuagint? It's the version that Hashem says, where is your brother Abel? And then darkly, Cain replies, um, what am I, his keeper or what? But that's the sort of in the same way Strauss says in the Meno comes to Socrates, and Socrates pisses him off, and then Meno says, you but don't show your face in my hometown of Miletus or whatever it was, Socrates. So he's very uh, angry over this thing, this Socratic treatment. We have a similar sort of tonality of the way people relate to each other in this Septuagint's version of the Genesis story. I think this is totally wrong, and so it's due to a trick in the translation, whereby one can say what was actually said is it was in the past tense, so that the Cain said, so that Cain is asked, where's your brother Abel? And he says, am I my brother's keeper? I didn't know. So the real sense, I think, is this primordial sense, and it's directly in the text, is that this is the record of the awakening of Sorga, of concern. So it's like it's the awakening of Dawson in a certain sense. That's what it's recording. And then, so, there's this change in the sense of what nature is breaking into the legal discussion in such a way that it involves a number of questions. And basically, this is also, I was looking at it earlier today, this Rene Girardian sort of territory, because in the way he has critical sort of look at Rousseau. And Rousseau is part of this discussion about state of nature, because it says, Hobbes didn't really understand what he was talking about. What did Hobbes and Locke really do? They sort of broke from this old Wycliffe version of state of nature, from the fall, from the notion of the biblical fall and the theology surrounding it. But then what does Rousseau do? He says he brings it more into a naturalistic view, which is just on this sort of raising its head at the gate of the theory of evolution, just before Lamarck comes out with his theory of evolution. And so then this notion of nature gets these different inflections and it takes on different senses, and then state of nature, likewise, it takes on different senses. State of nature as against civil society, state of nature as against government, as against perfect government, state of nature also as against custom, as against the law that would make a distinction between something like concubinage on the one hand, like I think that if you look at the movie, I guess it'll Raise the Red Lantern, which shows it's like very accurately 1920s concubinage situation. It's like the distinction between that and a Westerner who would have like several mistresses, and some wealthy Westerner in Paris or something with several mistresses set up in apartments or whatever, pedicures or whatever you like. What do you like? It's not by nature, as it were, that much different, but it could only be different because there would be some sort of positive law which would spell out like what's what's the form that's acceptable, and what's the marriage that's acceptable, what's the marriage that's not acceptable. Of course, with the Catholics, it would be much stricter. With ourselves, we have the mores of the I guess with Shampoo, with Warren Beatty shows sort of like the mores. Locke was more on the side of it's more the libertinage, as it was called, as against the Catholics. You see, there's obviously if the Catholics are empowered, then you get a totally different situation. And that was true still, like in Jung's time, as he remarked on the difference between the Catholic and the Protestant towns from village to village, or villages. Like, I mean, one difference was the parents were all uniformly taken care of in the Catholic towns, whereas the obligations were shirked usually in the Protestant towns. And of course, in a way that has nothing to do with the so-called individualism, but sort of, I guess, one aspect of liberalism. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of frame this in terms of, here we have a question about law that involves at the same time a question about the question about what nature is. So that questions about what the principles of laws should be made on. On the one hand, it's a question of, in the 17th century, batting down Catholic sources in a lot of ways, and then bringing in other notions. So like John Austin, the jurist, said of Locke that he was he said something like this, I don't know, remarkably sharp and just thinker. That's not exactly what he said, but he did say just thinker. I think it said like remarkably exact and just thinker, something like that. But yeah, the great John Austin, the great English jurist, who the Americans also cite, took for granted that legal judgment, involved justice and the ability to be a just thinker, just as one could be a accurate or exact thinker. One could also be a just thinker, have the sense of justice. John Austin thought that, but then you go a little bit further and you get to H.L. Hart. You see, this is criticized. It's no longer believed in. And it says you have to have a split between the normative and some other factor. And that John Austin had committed this terrible error that he didn't do that, because he still thought there was something called just thinking. And that turns out to be a fantasy, according to the later development. There's a lot. So I mean, there's a lot of threads here, and so this clue, CLEW, is sort of rolling about, and I just like set it there to be clawed at a little bit. I can't do any better at the moment.